Welcome to the Random Encounters Show. I'm DeathStalker V. In this episode, we're finally going to get around to talking about classic console gaming. I'm going to do my best not to dive off into gaming history, console specifics, and that kind of stuff, but sort of stay on topic. And I think the best topic to start with is what technically is, what am I calling classic gaming? You know, you've probably heard retro gaming, etc. But what is classic gaming? And the reasons I've found over the last year since I've really got into the classic gaming scene, that I find that I absolutely love it, even in our modern times. So to kick it off, classic gaming, or at least how I would define it, would be the first few generations of video game consoles. I particularly play everything from the Atari 2600 on up to the Atari 7800. Now, I know there's going to be people that argue that the 7800 came out after the NES. Didn't I just say we weren't getting into history? But I really consider the 7800 part of the classic gaming family, because classic gaming doesn't have much to do with dates. No, classic gaming has a particular style and feel to it that even if they produce a game, they released it tomorrow, a modern game, that if it had that style and feel, I would consider it a classic style game. And that's true with the modern homebrew movement. We'll get into that later, but one thing you need to know, that even though these systems are from the 70s and 80s, there's still games being produced for them. But as far as the classic style goes, it's very hard to describe. It's one of those things that you can understand from experience more so than words. The classic scene is like, it was sort of the Wild West frontier of video gaming. Video games had just emerged as a form of entertainment. So developers and publishers and all these different people that were involved with the industry were trying new things and producing new games, and there was no set genres really established just yet, especially in the early 80s and late 70s. So gaming was very unique from game to game, but they all shared some qualities and styles that made them classic games. And it's because of those qualities and styles that I have really fallen in love with the classic gaming scene. Now, a lot of people are into this scene because of nostalgia. That has a very tiny bit of why I'm exploring the classic video gaming scene, to be honest. Now, with the consoles that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes and talk about a little bit, I have had experience in the past as a very young child with all of these consoles. Okay? One of them was one that I absolutely wanted, but I never got. My first console, in fact, was a Super Nintendo, and probably my favorite console of all time. If you needed to know about a little bit about my gaming history, probably not, but hey, why not? So I don't come to the classic gaming scene with a lot of nostalgia. No. I came because there's a whole lot about the retro scene with the hyperinflated prices and different things that it just makes it where it's not fun to collect for. And getting out and finding new games and exploring libraries and stuff was a lot of the fun for me over the decades with many different consoles that I've owned throughout time. But that's sort of that era of being able to go out to yard sales and flea markets and different things to find games is sort of over with. As far as when I say the retro scene, we're talking Nintendo, Sega, that kind of stuff. The classic scene, with Atari, Intellivision, Colecovision, Bally Astrocade, while they can be expensive in certain instances, most of the time and for most of the games, they're very affordable. Some more so than others. We'll discuss that. We'll get into that. But let's talk about some reasons that I've found that just made me fall in love with this scene. First off, time management. I know that's an odd one to start with, but that's something that's important to me. With modern gaming, anybody that partakes in it knows that these games can take a lot of time. Many games, take hours to where it really starts kicking in and feeling good. While I can appreciate that as a primarily tabletop gamer, if I want to put a lot of hours into a game, I'm going to want to get a rule system, an RPG rule system, and the materials I want, and just sit down and have a really in-depth and interesting game on the table as a solo RPGist. So time management is a thing for me. So with the classic scene, these games were designed that as soon as you turn them on, you're thrown directly into the action. If you play them for 5 minutes, if you play them for 5 hours, you're guaranteed that if you like the game, to have a good time. That's something I can really appreciate about the classic scene. Because of hardware limitations, a lot of the classic scene, developers couldn't rely on graphics to sell their games. Not that they didn't push graphics of their times, but they couldn't, there was such a limited resource of everything that you did with video game development back in the 70s and 80s on these older consoles, these classic consoles. That the main area of interest for developers for producing a game was to create a game that looked good, sounded good, but the most important parts, most important things that they could do for the game was make sure that it had fun, interesting gameplay. There's only so much they could put on these small cartridges. We're talking about kilobyte size sometimes. Most of the time, byte size. It's nowhere near, the size limitations. So they knew what they could fit on the game. They knew how many sprites or images and tiles and different things they could put on there. And they knew the limitations. And yes, they played tricks and they did things throughout the years to get more and more out of these consoles. That's an interesting thing. But they knew that it wasn't going to be super immersive. So they had to make sure that the games were absolutely a blast to play. Many of them succeeded, many of them failed. So in discovering games and exploring games, that's always something that I look forward to. That no matter what genre the game is going to be, I want to know how fun is this game going to be. Some games I didn't expect to capture me, I play a whole lot of. Just to be honest. But playability is a reason that I love it. Fast, fun playability. Another reason we covered, but it was affordability. With the retro scene, Nintendo, Sega, 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit scene, that stuff is easily emulated today. In fact, I sold off a lot of my collection and I got the proper emulation devices in which to enjoy those games, in which I use them to enjoy those games. I will say that with the classic scene, I wouldn't necessarily recommend emulation, even though you can if you wanted to. The hardware, the physical hardware, was so much a part of a lot of the games. Take Space Shuttle, for example, on the 2600. The 2600 had a single button joystick. Okay? Space Shuttle required I think 5 buttons to really make it operations. It was a space shuttle simulator on the Atari 2600. I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't even have an Atari 2600, so I can't show that to you. But the 2600 models, they would have switches on top of the machines. So the game would utilize those switches like you were sitting at a command board or a pilot board or whatever you call it on a space shuttle, and you would throw switches at certain times to do in-game functions for the space shuttle. Other games, they would have, keypad controllers. They would have specialized controllers for certain games. But overall, I don't think emulation's going to be a very enjoyable route to take with the classic gaming. But it is affordable, to a certain extent. The consoles, depending on what console you want, but if you wanted to go with a 7800 or a 2600 or an Intellivision, you're more than likely going to pick up a really nice console for under $100. Games, the vast majority of classic games for all the systems are pretty cheaply had, even in places like eBay and stuff. Your mileage may vary out in the wild at yard sales and flea markets. Mine varies wildly. Either I hit a honey hole or it's just dry. I never see just 1 or 2 games or anything. It's either no games or we have a massive box of games. So when I'm searching for particular games, I'm forced to go to eBay and different places and see what I can find for the best price. For these consoles, like I said, the majority of the time, the games can be had in a range of $5, $10, under $20. Now, there's definitely some games on some of these consoles that can run up there. Okay? We'll talk about that as we look at these consoles here in a second. I'm going to give you just short of the why we have these consoles and the perks and the negatives about the consoles themselves. But, the collectability of it, getting out, finding new games, plugging them into the system and experiencing them for the first time is really part of the experience. You can't do that with an emulator. In fact, I found with emulators, the more games I have access to, the less I'm really interested in playing any particular game. You guys ever go through that? Let me know in the comments. Maybe I'm just weird. I don't know. But anyways, about a year ago, I was finishing up selling up some different pieces of my retro gaming collection. I know it's not on this channel, so don't look. It's on my old channel that I accidentally deleted. This is who you're dealing with here. We're back though. But I sold off the retro gaming collection, parts of it. Still got some parts I need to sell off. And I wanted to dive into the classic gaming scene. And the console I wanted to grab the most and build a library for the most and explore then, as I'm going to do going forward from here, was the Intellivision. So last year, I picked up an Intellivision 2. The numbered Intellivision 2, the Intellivision 3, that don't pay too much attention to it. It's just a model number. Okay, it's not talking about, an upgraded console or anything in particular. But the Intellivision was something I wanted to pick up. This was the very first console I ever wanted to own as a child. A childhood friend of mine had one. I absolutely loved it. We'll get more into that when we do our episode, particularly on the console itself for the Intellivision. And we take a look at a few different Intellivision consoles. But I know a lot of people like to follow the show. Okay? But the Intellivision, to me, is my favorite by far classic gaming console. The game library is robust. There's a lot of great games on this library, and they span a lot of different genres. From strategy games to simulation games to role-playing dungeon crawling games, to my favorite category, arcade type shooters. Some people call them shoot 'em ups. I call them just shooters. We can call them classic shooters. Okay, get ready. See that Centipede shirt? One of my favorites of all time. That and Galaga. But this console had all kind of great games for it that I wanted to check out. But it had a ton of unique games for it. Let's throw some gameplay footage up if we haven't already. Games like Microsurgeon. You know, that was one of the big reasons I wanted to grab this last year. Was I had never seen Microsurgeon before. I checked out an article online about it. I was like, holy smokes. A shooter inside the body. You're saving people. You're shooting medicine and ultrasonic waves. Yeah, this is right up my alley. Oh my goodness, if I could have had that as a kid, I would have went crazy. What's Burger Time? I mean, this console has some fantastic games on it. And so far, over a year of playing the different consoles we're going to see here today, this is my definite favorite. And this is a console that everyone loves to hate on, especially YouTubers. We're going to change that here. DeathStalker V is going to champion the Intellivision. Okay? Because the Intellivision can do it, guys. The homebrew scene, you just wait till you see what modern developers are getting this 1979 hardware to push out there. Okay? So look forward. There's going to be an episode on the Intellivision coming up. And it's definitely a suggested console that if you want to get into the classic scene, this would be my ¡1 way to go. And it's one of the consoles that has game prices that are cheaper than the other consoles. The 2600 is pretty cheap. We'll talk about that. But for this console, I've picked up a ton of some of the best games for under $10 each. In fact, I've spent some time watching eBay auctions and stuff. I've picked up bundles of good games, you know, for less than $2 each. And that includes shipping. So the Intellivision's definitely something you may want to check out. We're going to explore this together. It's one I definitely want to champion here on YouTube. Because I just don't see anybody really getting excited about the Intellivision. And it really deserves more excitement that it gets. Okay. Next up. The Atari 7800. I know a lot of people, that's not a classic gaming console. It was released after the NES. It came out in 86 or 87. Okay, I don't have a lot of time for that argument. This was developed in 1983 as the true successor of its predecessor, the Atari 2600. Okay, it natively plays 2600 games, and it has its own small library for the 7800. It was supposed to be released in 1984. Atari got bought out by Jack Tramiel and Commodore 64 fame. This stayed in a little bit of legal limbo until 86-87 when it was finally released worldwide. Before then, it did get a small release in 84. But the reason I say that it is definitely a classic console is because the 7800 games are all classic style games. Nintendo had hit America in 1985 and strong-armed all the publishers. So there were many publishers that had published things on the prior systems that came back and republished games on this one or published new games for it. It was a last hurrah for the classic gaming scene, and I absolutely love it. Games like Xenophobe, Commando, Exevious. You know, this was an arcade machine. And in a lot of its ports, hey, it beat the NES to me. Okay? But it also plays your 2600 library. There's very few, 1 or 2 games. Space Shuttle, since we talked about it, is one that it can play on this, but it's not very playable because this lacked the switches. It still has all 6 of the switches, but it's not set up in a way that you would enjoy the games that utilize the switches so much. But I really recommend this console as well. I'm a huge fan of the Atari 7800. I think it encapsulates the very beginning of the era with the Atari 2600 to the very end with the 7800 in one machine. And if you can find one of these locally or even online, you know, it is a great system to own to enjoy classic gaming on. If you only own one system, I really love the Intellivision, but this may be more up your alley, especially if you like arcadey style games. Now, one caveat with the 7800. I don't know why, because everyone loved to hate this console just a few years ago. I don't know why, but I noticed last year that game prices and console prices for the 7800 had begun the hyperinflation. Okay, where there's quite a few of 7800 games that are over $100 each. The majority of the games are not, but some of the better games definitely are. So that's just something to know. So it's much easier for me to recommend the Intellivision as a main console just because of that reason, collectability. Now, I was originally going to leave it at Intellivision, build a library for it, and the 7800, 2600. Build those libraries, okay? So that I could explore them and you could explore them with me. Because that's what we're going to be doing very soon. But a few months ago, I was talking to a guy on Facebook trying to purchase some 7800 and Intellivision games he had decent prices on. And I grabbed them. But he came back from his garage and said, I have something else you may want. You know, that I haven't listed for sale yet, but I've got it ready to go. And it was something that I had looked at, but I didn't think I really wanted to get into. And I'm not sure now if I still really want to get into it, to be honest. But let's show it. Let's talk about it. He came out with this massive, but clean, original Colecovision. Okay? Now the Colecovision in the past, you know, where I played the 7800, 2600 a whole bunch with my Aunt Lisa. We'll talk about that. We'll do an Aunt Lisa episode at some point. Okay? In her memory. And I had played the Intellivision. The only time I played a Colecovision was like one stay of 3 or 4 days. Basically a week, maybe, at most, of staying at a distant cousin's house. When I say distant, it means they live far away, you know, like hours and hours and hours away. We visited there as a kid. I had 2 cousins, a brother and a sister. One was, I don't know, he was going into Navy Academy. And I was maybe 5, 6? No, less than that. Maybe 4, and then the other cousins are around halfway in between us. You know, but definitely older. But they had a Colecovision. And I was definitely impressed by it at the time. Okay? I had never played an NES. I'd never seen anything other than the Atari 2600 and Intellivision when I seen this. I do like the Colecovision. Okay? It's got a great library. It's got some fantastic titles in that library, but most of the library are straight up arcade ports, which I don't have a problem with. In fact, in our day and age, I can really appreciate arcade ports. Why? Because I can play arcade perfect games on my MAME setup, my Hyperspin MAME setup with the custom arcade board I built. You know, I can play arcade perfect games. But with ports, they would be similar to the arcade games, but they would be different in many ways. So it's almost like a different game in a lot of ways. Sometimes, like in the ColecoVision case, sometimes games were better than their arcade counterparts, such as Ladybug, a game I'm absolutely crazy about on the ColecoVision and the Intellivision. It is a true Pac-Man killer. Throw Ladybug on the screen if we haven't already. Wake up in the back there. You know, what I hire you guys for. But the ColecoVision, Smurf Rescue from Gargamel's Castle. Different games, you know. It's a fantastic system. But, out of all the systems that we've talked about, it is one of the more expensive consoles. Not only just to get the console, but to get controllers, preferables, the games themselves. It tends to run much higher than collecting for the Atari 2600 Intellivision and 7800 in a lot of cases. But it does have a good classic lineup library. A much larger library than the 7800 got, which was 52 games. I think it got over 100 games for the Colecovision after all, even though it had sort of a short lifespan because of the video game crash. This was one of the true victims of the video game crash. People will tell you about that crash, how it killed Atari, how it killed Intellivision. That's not necessarily true. They just swapped hands. The Colecovision actually died. Okay? It died in the crash. The great crash of 82. Or was it 83? I don't know. I wasn't alive just yet. I was getting close. I was swimming around somewhere. That was a horrible thought. Anyways, back to it. These consoles, I think, these three consoles, I think best represent the classic gaming scene. I wasn't necessarily planning on getting that ColecoVision. Guy came with a stack of games. Some games I actually wanted, He came with the roller controller and offered me a great deal on it. If we keep the ColecoVision, I don't know. We're going to give it a shot though. But so far, the 7800, the Intellivision, and the 2600 are more my thing. But I think those three consoles, go do your research, wait for me to do the episodes on them, whatever. We're going to explore these three consoles because I think they're the three best representatives of the classic gaming era. What do you think? Let me know. Maybe you were alive during the classic gaming era and you can give me more info on it and some different insights. But I've absolutely fallen in love with it. Another thing that I've fallen in love with is the homebrew scene for these consoles. Companies like Electronite for the Intellivision. They're making the Intellivision do unbelievable stuff. I'm not going to lie. We'll do an episode on some of the Electronite stuff soon. And some of the other homebrew stuff as well. I really enjoy Atari Age. They make games for all these consoles. But they primarily focus on the Atari 2600, 5200, 7800. They're doing some fantastic work. They're one of my favorite companies as well because it's very easy to order from them. See, in the homebrew scene and in the modern publisher scene, they're putting out some fantastic games. Some of them are mind-blowing. Like I said, we're getting that Electronite stuff. You'll see what I'm talking about. Episode coming soon. But they're making these machines do things that you don't think they could do on native hardware. But a lot of these are small publications. They can be hard to get. That might be where SD card comes in most handy. I don't know. I'm just sticking to what I can physically put my hands on for these. So, just know that going in. The ColecoVision homebrew scene, I really don't know much about, if I'm honest. I've taken a look at a few of the companies and stuff, and they've been doing some interesting things and stuff, but a lot of the homebrews required a super game module, which goes into the expansion port of the ColecoVision. Another very expensive item. The homebrews typically are pretty expensive, even from the publishers and stuff. There's a whole lot. We'll do an episode on homebrews. Let's not get distracted here. But just saying that I found it much easier to get homebrews and modern published games from places like Atari Age and for the Ataris and different systems. They've got some ColecoVision games on there. There's one we're going to grab soon. Was it Jeepers Creepers? That looks like a cool shooter. They get them for the 7800. There's quite a few I want to get there as well. But they do some for the Intellivision as well. But the more interesting ones are definitely for the Atari systems. Homebrew, we'll take what we can get, share what we can get, and get excited about what's good. Now, a lot of you may be saying, hey, there's several other consoles that you've left out. You know, what about the Bally Astrocade? What about the Magnavox Odyssey 1 and 2? The Fairchild? You know, what about the Vectrex? The Atari 5200? I chose these three consoles to really talk about and explore because of various reasons. Let's take the 5200 for example. The 5200 looks very interesting. It has some very interesting games, though a very small library. It came out right before the crash and it was over with at that point. But the thing with the 5200 is that the hardware is very unreliable. The construction of the system wasn't up to par. Whereas an Atari 2600, you know, Heavy Sixer, Light Sixer, Vader model, Junior, whatever, these were built like AK-47s. You can go out and throw them in a mud hole, pull them off, and not even unplug it. Pull it out of the mud hole and just put a game in it and start playing. You know, they've survived time. Same with the Intellivision, at least the Intellivision 2. We'll get into that. The 7800 seems to be pretty robust. The Colecovision does have some problems. I haven't had any problems with this one, but that's very little experience with Colecovision. I have read over on Atari Age forums, you know, that's an important place if you want to get into classic gaming, that people have had a lot of problems with the Colecovision hardware. With the Colecovision, if that interests you, they have the Colecovision Phoenix, which is a modern-made Colecovision. Looks great, but hard to get. Waiting list. They only produce a few models a year or something. I don't know. The same with all this modern stuff. I don't know. I just get what I can get. What else do you want? Okay? But, you know, with older systems, I'm just skipping over the ones that are known to have reliability issues. Other ones like the Bally Astrocade and such. They're interesting, but they weren't doing anything more than the Atari 2600 was doing. So, I mean, okay, yeah, they had different games and stuff, but what I mean is I don't think they made the snuff. I'm sure a lot of people's going to come with hate. Hey, if I run into these systems, I will grab them and we'll check them out. I'm not dismissing them. But for the most part of what I've seen, you know, where I think the action's at is the Intellivision, the Atari 2600, the Colecovision, and the 7800. Why not? Anyways, I'm rambling on, so it's time for us to go. I hope you enjoyed the Random Encounter show. We primarily do tabletop gaming here, but hey guys, we're diving off into different stuff. Let's go. Hey, this is DeathStalker V. I wanted to thank you for watching the Random Encounter show. If you love tabletop gaming, solo RPGing, or classic video games, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. If you want more of the show, head over to our channel's About page. There you will find our Facebook and Facebook group pages where you can join in on the fun. Want to help support the show? Make sure to use our affiliate and sponsor links next time you're shopping for your favorite gaming products. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time when we roll for Random Encounter.